Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Project Egg Show. Today, we have the honor of speaking with Chris Do. Chris is an Emmy Award-winning director, designer, strategist, and educator. He's the chief strategist and CEO of Blind, executive producer of The Skool, and founder of The Futur, an online education platform that teaches the business of design to creative thinkers. Chris, it is absolutely a pleasure and an honor to have you on the show today. Welcome, and thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks so much. It's my pleasure to be here.
Let's jump right in. What is your story?
What part of my story should I tell you that would be of interest to your audience?
The whole thing.
The whole thing. Okay. I'm a first-generation immigrant. I'm a refugee from Vietnam, landed in Kansas City, Missouri, lived there for a couple of years before ultimately living in San Jose, Northern California. And I grew up like many first-generation Asian American kids, trying to find my place in the world, not exactly fitting in, and living under a culture and rules where doing the creative arts was not an option for us. So there was no room in my life and my worldview at that point in time to go into the creative field. And all of that changed when I got a job working at a silk screening place. And I love to draw and I like making things, but I just didn't know what outlet that was going to take shape. On a random request by my boss at that time, he asked me to go and pick up some typography. I didn't know the term. Somebody was going to typeset something for him. And this is when I meet my very first graphic designer, professional person that I've ever met in my life. And his name was Dean Walker. So I drove over to Dean's house. I went in his door, saw this amazing home studio that he built for himself with desk and a drafting table, T-square and triangles and rapidograph pens. And just, it was amazing to me. And he had this little grayish beige box. That was one of the earliest Macs. He was working on that, and you would hit a button, this giant refrigerator-like contraption would whirl to life, and out came an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper on the very first Apple laser printer. And I looked at him like, wow, this is what you do? This is your living? This is how you provide for yourself? And that moment changed my life. And that's how I knew at that point, being a graphic designer was not only possible, but somebody else was doing it, and I could do it too. So that's kind of my story.
Let's jump back into your childhood. What did it smell like?
When you say smell, what do you want to know?
I want to know the first thing that comes to mind.
Like literally, like what I smell, or is that a euphemism for something else?
No, like, what you smell, because I feel like smells trigger memories and might lead to some cool insight.
Nothing strong is coming up. Probably my earliest memories are living in Kansas City, Missouri. It would rain and snow, and we lived in a 3-story brick house, and so it smelled old. This was not a high rent neighborhood because we were barely just making it in the world, and so we lived in this old brick house, and it was damp. So whatever that smells like.
What was your relationship like with your parents growing up, and how did that evolve over time?
I'm very fortunate to have the parents that I have, and I still have a great relationship with them today. My dad's style of managing and running the household is fairly typical in lots of ways from an older generation Asian male coming to the United States, which was very traditional, family-oriented, faith-based. We grew up Catholic, and he was very stern. This is where he differed from probably most of his siblings, which was, it was generally assumed and expected that dads would beat kids for misbehaving. You have the vision of the belt or the stick. That's kind of pretty common within Asian culture, getting slapped in the face. But my dad never hit me. There was always a threat of violence. It was always a possibility. But my dad took a different approach. He would lecture us, and me specifically, sometimes for an hour and a half. And I would just sit there and listen to him. So if it was about misbehaving or not being kind to my brother, my younger brother, he would just sit there and lecture me forever. And I do distinctly remember, even into junior high and high school, that if I did something wrong, I just sometimes thought to myself, I just wish he would just hit me and get it over with, because I have to sit here and listen to this for so long. Later on in my life, now I realized the value of what he did for me, that he spent the time and energy after coming home from work, working a long day, to give me an hour of his time to help me understand his value system and why he decides what he decides. And that's what I wind up teaching today. And that is the art of teaching. So he could give me a prescriptive thing, never do that again, and give me no understanding and clarity as to why not, what decisions are you making. But he was downloading his operating system into my brain in the way that he knew how. My mom, on the other hand, was and is a very sweet woman. She would never hurt a fly. She was always very open and giving, and had the most generous attitude towards us and other people. So whenever we made something, she always thought it was the best. So it's that combination of stern Asian father and very loving and nurturing Asian mother. And that combination of the two, I think, produced three kids that are uniquely different. And we were able to find our own voice in the world.
What are those voices of each of your siblings and yourself? Like, what was that relationship between the three of you, and how did that evolve? What was that dynamic like?
Yeah, so I'm the middle child, and three boys. So my oldest brother is 4 years older than me. My older brother is 4 years older. And I think this has a lot to do with birth order, but he is super self-determined, very logical to almost a fault. He's a software engineer, and he's very driven, motivated, but maybe not be in touch with his full range of emotions. And he probably thinks a little bit more in a binary way, which makes him a great software engineer. He's very driven, very successful. He's exited out of 2 companies that have gone public, and now he's on his 3rd company. My younger brother is only 1 year younger than me. He is very much, in the birth order of things, the baby of the family. And he is a super creative individual, never went to college, learned design and aesthetics from me, and then took it on his own. He's a carefree world traveler. Even though he's 40 some odd years old, he is, I think, a child in his mind. He, to this day, still goes roller skating. What is that called? Roller hockey?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah. And it's like, when does one grow up? But that's the interesting thing about his very youthful spirit. So we're all very different. We're driven by different things, and we have very different relationships with my parents, or our parents.
With those lectures that your dad took the time to give to you, or share with you, what were some of the biggest takeaways, like the values that you took away that have helped you become successful?
I think my dad really taught me how, we call it the golden rule. Everybody knows the golden rule, right? Treat other people like the way you want to be treated. And he helped me to understand that when you're young and you've got a lot of hormones going on, you think, well, this is my perspective, and that's the only one that matters. And he helped me to learn that if you just look at it from a different perspective, then you start to see how unreasonable you are. And this is part of how I teach people how to respond to objections when clients bring them up. So when somebody says something to you like, the budget's too high, or can you do it for less, or just add this extra thing in, what happens is immediately you start to become overwhelmed with emotions, because you feel like you're being attacked and devalued, and how dare they say this, and don't they know how hard it is to do this thing? So you're only looking from your perspective. What I try and teach people is stop, get separation. Like, you're allowed to feel those things, get separation, and think about what's happening, the dynamic between the 2 people that are talking in the room, to be more mindful of what's going on. So when that person is saying those things, and this is straight coming from Tony Robbins here, I'm paraphrasing, that every form of human-to-human interaction, human-to-human communication, is either an expression of love or cry for help. So when somebody says to you, can you do it for less? That does not sound in my ear as an expression of love. So therefore, it must be a cry for help. And we don't want to respond to a cry for help with our own cry of help. cry for help, right? So if they say, can you do it for less? My first question would be, have you been burned before? Are you going through some tough times? Or is this not really a big, important project that we're talking about? So it's a way for me to take myself out of the conversation and try to understand it from the other person's point of view. And I think those seeds were planted by my dad, who wasn't trying to raise an entrepreneur or a teacher. He was just sharing his life view with us. And that's why he's very balanced and fair-minded and really cool, like in terms of how he looked at situations.
That is an insanely powerful concept that you just mentioned, of recognizing what other people are saying for what it actually is, instead of almost assigning your emotional interpretation of it just from that gut reaction. That's powerful. That is really, really powerful. When you were growing up, what were some of the activities or hobbies or just things that you like to do, and why were those things important to you?
When I was growing up, the happiest times in my life were around creating things, like making and drawing and gluing things together. We didn't have a lot of means, so a giant pad of paper and some Crayola markers were all I needed to kind of express myself. And I remember, I think it was my 7th birthday, and all my uncles and aunts came over, and my cousins gave me gifts, but the one that stood out was one my uncle brought home, a giant ream of paper from wherever he got it from IBM or whatever, and he laid it in front of me, and he said, I have a pack of markers for you. And I just remember immediately, the first thing I did was to draw him a thank you picture to express the joy. And that set the tone, I think, for most of what I do. I like to draw, I like to doodle. I made homemade comic books, and I could never draw like the greats, like Kirby and Buscema. I just couldn't, but I tried. So I fell in love with reading comics, and that was my 75-cent art instruction booklet, self-made. And I would just go over the books until they became tattered and just literally came apart at the seams. And that was where my joy came from. And like I said before, we didn't have a lot of means growing up, fairly lower class. We didn't have glue. We don't have art supplies that my kids to this day are spoiled with, because anything they want to make is available for them. So we would have to improvise and get things to stick together by using old rice and rolling up into a ball and making it tacky, and temporarily use it to join things together. I remember going to the creek and picking up fallen bamboo sticks and then using a knife and to whittle them together to make accessories for my Star Wars action figures, to make a crossbow for Chewbacca, or to try to build things and to learn how to manipulate dough and to kind of create castles and things from that. So always a life of creativity, but never allowing myself to think in those early days that this could be a profession. This is just a hobby.
Well, it's a good thing that you gave Chewbacca his crossbow, because he was very instrumental in helping the good guys win. So when you were in high school, who were you? What were you known for?
I think I was still searching for my identity in high school. I think most of us can relate to that. That I was in nerdy Dungeons and Dragons, comic book reading, video game playing, WWF back then, watching person. I like to skateboard. So this definitely did not fit within, hey, if you want to establish social status, this is definitely not what the path you would go down. So I tended to hang out with mostly girls / women back then, because they're the least judging people I could be around, which created all kinds of other problems for me, right? Certain associations are made with boys who hang out with girls that they're either up to no good or they're very effeminate, which I was both those things. I mean, not the no good, but just kind of effeminate in the way that I cared about the way I looked, the way I combed my hair, the clothing I wore, more so than boys my age at that time. And I wasn't into athletics. I'm not watching NFL or NBA or anything like that. That was not what I wanted. I looked at skateboards, and I looked at t-shirts and clothing, and drew, and I looked at magazines like Sunset Magazine, and looked at the interior spreads, and looked at things that I didn't know at that time, but like wainscoting, panel molding, and the way that lights and couches were laid out. That's what interested me. And I thought for a long time I was actually gay, and I wasn't sure, not because I was attracted to men, but in my world, if you're into those kinds of things, then you're not a man's man. There was something wrong with you, or I felt a lot of times I was broken. And I liked playing around with the easy bake oven. That's what I wanted. Whereas other guys were like, give me the BB gun or the go-kart. I enjoyed making things. So that was a hard thing for me to reconcile for a really long time. So searching for a voice, for an identity, mostly just to fit in or to disappear. And luck or fate would have it that it's not easy to disappear, because people who are a little different, who aren't physically built like other people, become targets for bullies to attack. And for sure that happened. And I had to learn to defend myself and not to take anything. So I got into a lot of fights, more so than I would like, but I knew that if I let people pick on me, then that's going to persist forever. And I could see it as clear as night and day, because other nerdy types were being picked on every single day. And luckily I had an older brother who had asked, what do I do about this? And he says, look, kiddo, I can't defend you, and I can't come in there and jump in for you. So you're going to have to learn that once you push back, the bullies will move on. That's easier said than done. So when they would challenge me to like meet them out by the dugout behind the baseball diamond, I would say, okay. We'd wrestle, we'd throw things around, and then eventually they learned there's an easier target somewhere else. And I started to learn or develop this own voice within me, which is, you know what, I'm going to stand up to people. This has now become my own thing, that for a lot of my younger, like adult life, it was about being pushed around, trying to fit in. And now I'm tired of doing that. So I'm going to be loud. I'm going to be who I am. And I don't care anymore if you like it or not.
As you were going through this and you're struggling with your identity, and you're growing, you're learning, you're figuring out what you actually care about, was there one moment, and I know you mentioned that interaction with the graphic designer, that was a very pivotal moment for you, but was there one moment where the identity clicked, where you were like, yes, now it's starting to make sense. Now I feel like I'm in alignment.
Yeah, I think that was after me getting accepted into Art Center, and then taking Simon Johnson's Typography 1 class, where it seemed like I was given the keys to the universe, this magical thing to understand and break apart all design, not just two-dimensional typographic design, but three-dimensional things like interior design, furniture, space, the relationship between objects. I felt like that was the moment where it became crystal clear, like this is who I was meant to be, and I found myself. I felt very confident in that moment in time, and it's something I wish for everybody, young or old, that you actually do find what it is that you're really good at and what you do exceptionally well without even trying that hard.
So clearly you have an insanely impressive resume, and you've done some amazing, incredible things in your career. What were some of those turning points and pivotal moments from once you had that experience with the graphic designer until now? Like, what were those key experiences on your journey up until now?
Are you talking about key moments that's personal, professional? Like, how do you want me to answer this? Because of course our life is full of moments of big decisions and small decisions. What kind of answer are you looking for?
I want to explore it all, because I feel like there's not just one linear path. I feel like it's all inclusive based on both personal and professional.
Okay, well then put a time limit on it. How long do you want me to talk about this so I can try to pick what parts make sense? Because I could probably talk to you about this for hours.
Let's say 15, 20 minutes.
Okay, that's a lot of time. All right, we will do it. I think as many things happens in your life, and I'm a believer in this, so I'm going to try to say this for people who are just listening to it, if you're driving or walking, to kind of visualize this. And your life is like this path, and it's a straight line, right? And then it hits a point in the road when that path forks. Sometimes it forks into 100 different paths, but more often than not, in my mind, it usually splits into two parts. And then you have to make a decision. And this is the beauty of free will and choice. You get to decide, do I want to stay comfortable in my own lane and stay where I'm going because that feels pretty predictable and safe? Or do I want to go down this dangerous path, one that's fraught with possible failure and humiliation? And once you have enough momentum behind you, you start to learn that the path that you want to take is the one that's full of danger, the thing that makes you scared. Because out of that pain, the suffering, and the risk is an incredible reward. So I'm going to map it out for you, okay? So if I don't draw and get known for being drawing in high school, and I'm not referred to the silk screener because that's what I did for him. I traced over his drawings so that the wrestling coach, who I didn't know, put me in touch with the silk screener. And then that's what I do. And then if I don't show up present and eager to do work, even though my job title doesn't fit it, if I don't drive out to do the pickup for Dean, if I throw attitude, I don't meet Dean, things change. And then I come back and tell Brad, I know what I want to be. I want to be a graphic designer. Then he tells me the school that you want to go to, the best school that you can go to is Art Center. And I commit that to myself that this is what I'm going to go. This is where I'm going to go. And I don't know much about art schools because I wasn't even thinking about this, but he says Art Center. I start going around telling everybody I'm going to go to Art Center, and their eyebrows raise. And I can tell by their reaction, this is a serious big deal school. I work on my portfolio. I submit it. I get in. My path starts to become clear and more paths open up. I dive deep into design. I work like a beast. I not only just work hard, but I try to work really smart. I make lots of sacrifices. I lose a girlfriend in the relationship, or I lose a girlfriend and just focusing in on just school. I worked in the computer lab. I spent all my free time in the library while other people partied. What happened was other students started to notice. So they would ask me to help them out with projects, some for free, actually quite a few, some were for money. So my network of friends is working for me now, such that one of these friends, Colleen Mathis, invites me to be her partner at an ad agency. Not a partner that I'm an owner, but just her. She's a copywriter. I'm an art director. We're going to work together. And then these doors open and everything is building up inside of me in terms like, wow, I guess I'm recognized for doing the right kinds of things, that I'm pretty good at this, and people are willing to open doors for me. Fantastic. That job doesn't work out for me. I finish school. I do a couple of freelance things. I get an opportunity to meet one of the foremost main title designers through a relationship from my friends from school. See how they're all like interwoven here? So I go meet with him. And of course, he's a busy guy. His name is Kyle Cooper. And he makes me wait in the lobby for an hour and a half. And I was like pretty cocky at that point in time in my life. I could have just walked out. I could say, no, wait, this is so disrespectful. What am I doing? I sit there, I gut it out. I meet him. He flips through my portfolio. He offers me a gig to work on a main title assignment, which, if you know anything about this, is a very rare opportunity because not very many people get to work on main titles. So I start learning about main titles, and this blows my mind. So now I think to myself, I want to do motion design forever. I stopped doing print design, identity design, web work. I'm just going to focus on motion. That's another scary path to go down because I know nothing about this, but that's what I wind up doing. So all those decisions lead me to this place where I'm now going to operate and own a motion design company, one of probably 12 that could do what we're doing in the world. And it felt pretty great. People threw money at us, great opportunities to work on jobs, got to meet a lot of people. Some of those people I still work with today, 20 some odd years later. Now, I'm going to rewind the tape. It's about 2014, 2015. I bump into an old friend of mine at an AIGA board meeting. I ask him, I'm struggling with web design now. It seems like motion has played its path. I want to explore something different. He's like, let me show you. Well, he does show me. I learned something new, super scary. The entire direction of the company changes again. So now, instead of doing just motion design, we're doing brand strategy. We're developing websites and identity systems. So it's kind of coming full circle now. The thing I learned how to do, I left behind, but now I'm right back here armed with more knowledge and more tools, things that they never taught me in school. And I can apply this and I feel like, wow, my value in the world is rising. I can do the work that I dreamt of doing that I didn't know how. And here it is in front of me. The blueprint is so clear. While doing this web work, he invites me to partner up with him on this education company called the Skool. Again, it could be a distraction, but I decided, let's go for it. He puts me on YouTube, and I'm reluctantly participating in this thing until I start to figure out this is a pretty cool, amazing platform to create content for. And I start to feel like, wow, this is kind of like self-expression, kind of like art. I get to make this stuff, and I get to have a relationship with the people who watch our content. Fast forward, now I'm sitting here in our office looking at you doing a Zoom call, probably most likely not because of the work we did at Blind, but the video content, the path that I'm on as an educator, that's probably more likely why we're talking today. I don't know for a fact.
That's incredible. And it's amazing how the things that happened in the past almost compounded over time to present you with more and more opportunities and to give you the access to those doors that of course you took action on and opened yourself. But it's incredible how those things from the past really did come back, and all the work that you had put in for all those years. So what's the story on the Emmy Award? Where does that fit in the chronology?
We had finished a couple of music videos and commercials, and a receptionist at the time, I forget her name, I'm just terrible, I can forget this. She said, hey, should we submit this for an Emmy Award? And I was thinking, probably not, because we do mostly commercials and music videos, and Emmys are associated with TV. And she said, well, Chris, I looked at it. I wouldn't have asked you this otherwise. There's a category called art direction, and it's for things just like music videos. So really? Okay, go ahead and submit. So it was somebody else seeing an opportunity for me that I wasn't even paying attention to that we submitted. And it was a juried award, meaning it doesn't go out to the general, the academy. That the I forget what they're called, the peer group, they get to decide. And they decided it was worthy of receiving an Emmy. So the next thing I know, I'm walking on the red carpet with my wife, getting ready to accept my award, and it was a pretty freaking cool event. All because somebody said, should we try? Okay. That's it.
Parallel to your professional journey this whole time, what's been going on in your personal life?
My personal life is deeply integrated and tied into my professional life. I don't believe in work-life separation. I believe in work-life integration. My wife is my best friend from school, my first friend from school. She's a graphic designer, and she's an amazing person. And we decided to work together, formed a company, and ultimately a few years afterwards, she retired and now just designs for anatomy books, which is pretty awesome. And I have two boys, and one of them is, they're both super artistic. One is more bent on science. That's his inclination. So I'm going to let him explore that. And then the little one is kind of like his dad. He's not so sure about himself, looking for his voice and his identity. And he loves art and making things, and he just needs a little guidance. So I'm there to support him. And as of this year, he's homeschooled. So he spends a lot of time with me, and we get to travel the world. He comes to the office, and normally he would be here, but he's taking a cooking class right now. So he's not going to be here. And so my wife and my son, the other son is off to a boarding school. We get to spend a lot of time making content together. I'm encouraging his artwork and him building his own YouTube channel, helping him to figure out how to do the social media game. And believe it or not, at the ripe old age of 12, he's already sold 3 logos to his friends, which, I mean, to even understand what a logo is, to be able to build it, to be able to charge for it. And my wife was sharing a story with me that she said, your son just charged his friend $25 to design a logo. I'm like, wow. And how do you know how to do that? And then he said, Daddy taught me. That's because I charged him $25 to design a logo for him. So he used the exact same framework, the script, the responses, and everything. That little booger was paying attention.
So we talked a lot about how you've gotten to where you are now.
Mm-hmm.
But if you reflect on your journey, and we talked a little bit about, the emotional intelligence. In the very beginning, we talked about, trying to understand another person's point of view. We talked about how, if you just try, you might end up winning an Emmy, which is amazing. What were some of the other really key qualities or skills that you feel were instrumental to helping you achieve the success that you have?
Say that one more time.
Yeah, what were some of the key qualities or attributes that you feel you deployed most often in order to get to where you are now?
Okay, first of all, for anything to happen, you first must believe it's possible. I have an attitude and a mindset that anything that you want to achieve in your life, no matter how big, you can do. You can manifest things happening in your life, from goals to relationships and everything else in between. That the mind is a very powerful thing, that it could dream of things and then we can make it a reality. Like, we can dream of being on the moon before we know how to build a rocket ship to land on the moon. And that's the beauty of the human mind. So there's a fundamental belief in self, dare I say it, where people vacillate between self-loathsome, from being self-loathing to self-loving. I don't spend a lot of time in the self-loathing part. I spend most of my time in self-loving, that there's a lot of personal care that's happening there in my own mind. And I'm constantly converting negative, dark, pessimistic thoughts into positive, optimistic, empowering thoughts. That's what I'm doing all the time. I have the courage to dream really big dreams. I have the mindset and the wherewithal to make the plan on how to achieve those dreams, and then the work ethic to follow it up, backed by the skills from training and experience. I think those are very critical components. I don't think somebody can just go out into the world and achieve what they want to achieve by only honing in on one of those things. So if you're a mindset person, but you don't follow through with a plan, you're just a dreamer. If you're really good at planning, you're going to have to wait for someone else to tell you what the dream is. And if you work really hard, you'll be successful. It helps to have skill, but if you don't have a direction which you're going in, you'll be successful at doing something that you may not love. It's a combination of those four traits, I believe.
Like I said before, we've talked a lot about how you've gotten to where you are now, but can you drill down and really take a few minutes to explain, like, where are you? What's going on in your life right now? How high up the mountain have you really climbed?
I'm just scratching the surface, man. I am. In terms of the motion graphics world, I believe at one point we could legitimately say we're to be considered a top 10 motion design firm in the world. And that's probably debatable by anybody, but at least I think we're in that proximity. I don't pursue that anymore. And in terms of where we are in this education space, where we're trying to educate people on YouTube, I don't think there are many channels that exist that do what we do. And usually the search results bear fruit of that. So if you type in things like branding, typography critique, logo design critique, or something, things like that, some very broad search terms, we're going to be top 10 search results. But we're just getting started. This is just the beginning of a giant effort, because we have a much bigger mission here. And our mission is to create a online education platform whose curriculum can be literally competitive with a private art school university. That's it. That's the plan. So in order to do that, we have to accomplish lots of different things to get there. But our hope and our goal is that what you can get from us in terms of what it costs, you could buy everything from us for probably the same amount or a little bit less than what it would take for you to spend in 1 semester at a private art school. So the value, ROI, will be through the roof.
What are some of those things that you see propelling you forward? Like, where do you see specifically, or where did your vision kind of guide you as far as like your future moves, how you're going to accomplish that, like the things you need to do to make that happen?
Okay, I'm sorry. One more time.
Yeah, basically, what moves do you foresee yourself making moving forward to accomplish that goal?
Well, we're still in the phase of proving the business model. We've been luckily growing 300% year over year, which is very exciting. We wonder how far and how long we can maintain that growth curve. We're hoping it never ends, but we shall see. And as you grow, as you move into different spaces, now you're elbowing out a lot of bigger competitors, right? When it was just you and it was just a handful of other weirdos in the universe doing what you do, it was a little easier to get ahead of them because we're professional. We have I'm self-financed and I can afford to do this. And this is pretty cool. But as you get into spaces where companies are doing $5 to $100 million, the competition got a lot steeper. And that's what we have to contend with. So really what we're trying to do is to build the most dynamic learning platform in the way that we teach and the content that we teach, so that when somebody is searching for what it is that we do, we become synonymous with that subject matter. So we're doing a lot of design fundamentals. We're also doing a lot of business design courses so that people who are in the creative space can set themselves up to be successful as an entrepreneur, whether they're solopreneur or they're scaling a team or an agency of 50 to 100 people. We want to be there for those people. So those are the moves that we're making. We need to hire more teachers. We have to understand different pedagogical models. And really that's our focus right now.
What do you feel is the biggest lesson that people need to learn from you?
Probably the biggest lesson that they could learn from me is to learn to believe in themselves, because once you're able to do that, everything is possible. If you don't believe in yourself, somebody can teach you all the tools, the techniques, the theories, the history, but you'll still be afraid to try. You'll still be afraid to ask for just a little bit more money. So that fear is crippling. So what I try to teach people is how to take the power back from certain words to prevent them from taking action.
What's your philosophy on developing deep, meaningful, and genuine connection with another person?
I think this is the reason why we exist on Earth, isn't it? That you can live a pretty isolated and successful life by yourself, but that would have little meaning. What's the point of accomplishing things, of learning things, if you can't share with other people? So as we go further down the rabbit hole of social media and living on apps, we become, in a weird way, technologically disconnected from people, but simultaneously more connected to more people that we would never have access to. And I think it's us trying to reconcile those two differences. So I like going on trips where I can do workshops and I can do talks, because that's the time where I get to connect to people. Somebody tweeted out this morning, and it was a very big compliment, and I appreciated them recognizing this. They said something like, hey, Chris is a pretty cool guy. Not only did he attend, he gave a talk, he did workshops, he sat in other people's workshops, and he sat in the audience, and he stood around for the entire conference to meet people, to say hello, to give them words of encouragement, or do whatever it is that I'm doing so that I can connect with people. And it's interesting because if you stay up late enough, if you hang around a person just long enough, you can form some pretty amazing relationships with people. I'm not saying that we're going to be best friends forever, but in that moment in which I'm there, I do feel a genuine connection that may transcend into something more or may not. I don't know, but it's pretty cool that can happen, mostly because of me and the team here producing content to share with people.
When do you feel like somebody is very connected to you? Like, what does somebody have to do to really get on your radar and connect with you to where you feel a very personal relationship with them?
It's not that hard, because all you have to do is reach out. But I'll tell you what doesn't work is if you reach out and all you think about is yourself. It's like, what's in it for me? Answer my question. And some people are asking you questions that in a normal world, nobody would ever think is possible. They're asking, how should I go about conducting my life? Well, that's not going to happen in a tweet. It's not going to happen in an Instagram story. It's too personal. It's too deep. It's too complicated. It's too many layers. I can't give that kind of advice. So that's definitely the wrong way to do it. I think like most people, I would say that get to know me. Don't make assumptions about who I am. And just like in your normal life, it's not any different. You want there to be an exchange of values and ideas. I think that's where the relationships are born. So if we can have a deep conversation about something that you're passionate about, but not just you talking the whole time, not just me talking the whole time, if there's a genuine exchange of ideas, I think that's a pretty good foundation for a relationship.
How do you learn? Like, do you, and are you more focused on the content or the teacher?
I don't care so much about the teacher. So I try to learn from anybody and everybody that I can. My children tend to be my best teachers because they ask me questions I don't think about that often. And I know I have to explain it to them in ways that just anybody can understand. So they require me to be more specific about my language, to be more inclusive in the things that I say, so that the examples aren't coming out from left field. So my good teachers are my children, especially my youngest, because I spend a lot of time with them. My wife, who constantly challenges me on ideas, and she is confident enough in herself and our relationship that she can say these kinds of things, which most people may or may not be intimidated by me and not want to say these kinds of things. I think I learn from the people that work for me, the people that I work with. I learn from my clients, but I'm also somewhat of a knowledge vampire. I read things, and I read things with the intensity and the lens of teaching others, that the information I consume, I pass on almost immediately to other people. So I enjoy reading books, listening to podcasts, watching TED Talks and YouTube videos. And this is the beauty of the time and the age in which we live in, that there's so much great information out there that you could spend many lifetimes absorbing it all.
What's your theory? I'm sorry, what is your greatest theory?
I don't know if I have greatest theory. I have lots of theories. I don't know if I sit back and try to catalog and prioritize my theories into here's the greatest theory. I don't know, but let me rephrase the question in my mind and see if this is what you're asking. I was recently speaking at Creative South. A gentleman I just met, his name is Dylan Mingus, and he's an incredible lettering artist and illustrator. He asked, if you could go back in time and tell your 20-year-old self something, what would you say? And I said, to the effect, out-teach the competition. Teach what you know. Teach while you learn. Just teach. Give generously, abundantly, without expectations. Wonderful things will happen for you.
That's awesome, by the way. No, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And I really do appreciate you coming on the show today and sharing this time with me. It's truly been a pleasure and an honor. So thank you very much.
Thanks, man.
So yeah, I just have a few more quick questions, and
Okay,
then
go
we'll
ahead.
wrap it on up. Is there anything about yourself that you think is an important part of who you are that we didn't talk about today? In other words, what did I miss?
I think you asked a lot of really good questions. In me telling you things, did you hear things that, is there a whole gap? Did I jump over something? And I'd be happy to dig into it much deeper. Because I never know like what it's going to be valuable to the person. So I try not to talk too much and then just pretend like it's the most interesting thing. So if there's something that you heard that you're like, hey, can you lean in a little harder on that? Because I want to know more about it. I'd be happy to. But I don't think you skipped anything.
I'm trying to think if there were any holes. None of them, if they were there, none of them really jumped out that hard. I feel like you very comprehensively, gave great answers to all the questions I had.
I want to share one concept with you. I'll share one concept that I don't get to talk to too many people about. Is I'm a dichotomy of juxtaposed ideas, cultures, everything, right? So I'm originally from Vietnam, which is Southeast Asian And then I'm living in America, so I'm not quite American enough for Americans, and I'm not quite Vietnamese enough for Asians. And so I'm just stuck in a lot of different worlds and different time, where I grew up in a time and place where there were VHS tapes and you have to go to the store to rent things, and with a lot less information, to the information age that we live in. So I'm just straddling two worlds, it seems like. If you can imagine two blocks of ice splitting apart, and me with one foot on one and one foot on the other, just trying to keep it together. But somebody could say that, well, that sucks. That's a horrible thing. But I think of it as, well, that's kind of uniquely different about me, right? So there are some older people who may have completely missed the internet boat. And there's some young people who are growing up right now who don't know any other world except for the world that's interconnected the way it is. So if we can pull from those things. So the dichotomy, the juxtaposition exists, that a lot of people see me as a super confident person, and some interpret that as being arrogant, and I accept that if that's what they think. At the same time, I'm also a person who is full of gratitude and appreciates every single person, whether they know it or not, who became a teacher of mine. And I make a mental habit of recognizing those people on a daily basis in my mind. So my heart is full of gratitude, because if you say, how did you get here? Well, the list would be very long, going back to a certain, I'll give you an example. English literature in high school, Miss New Year. She was my English lit teacher, and I'm going to be honest, that's not a subject that turned me on. But Miss New Year saw something in me that she cut me all kinds of slack. I wouldn't bring my book to class, and she would just loan me one. While anybody else, if they didn't bring their book, they were going to get points down. And those acts of accommodation and just flexibility just made me feel special. And I don't know what it is I did in that moment in time to earn that from her. Maybe she saw that I was a good kid and this wasn't where I wanted to be, and she didn't try to force me to become something. And she was super cool. Or Mr. Isaac Alsoparty from junior high, John Steinbeck Middle School, and giving us the assignments to build a hot air balloon, a race car, construct a house, and build a bridge. He was a general contractor, and he was teaching shop. Now, generally speaking, shop is where all the dumb kids go, right? All the other smart kids are doing advanced fill in the blank. But I learned so much about aerodynamics, about construction, about design, about layout, about craftsmanship, that those are 4 genius assignments for Mr. Alsoparty. And I can go down the list. So to me, part of who I am is built up from hundreds, maybe thousands of teachers, not even people who are in school, even though I gave you 2 examples from school, who've given me something, a gift, and I take it. So when I say everybody can be the teacher, I really do mean that. And if I see 2 dogs looking at each other and one dog does a behavior while the other dog does something else, if there's a lesson there, I'm going to pull it from that moment. And I'm going to walk away and I'm going to say, thank you, Rex. Thank you, Spot. I've learned something from you right now.
When you were talking about learning something through the lens of teaching it, and then you also mentioned how you're always trying to teach as you learn. Can you explain those concepts a little bit more?
Absolutely. And you can see this is my world, so I'm going to be fired up about this part. When you read a book, what is your intention of reading the book? Now, some people say, well, because I was assigned the book to read. Okay. I have to give an oral presentation. I have to take a test. Or I like the idea of reading because it makes me feel smart. And I have a group of people in my book club that we're going to share ideas about. Those are all good intentions. That's fine. My intent in reading is not to finish the book. My intent in reading is to scrape the maximum amount of knowledge from that book, from cover to cover. I'm not reading to finish a book. I'm reading the book to teach. So if you put on that lens, that means that not only do I have to understand the concepts, I have to build learning modules from it. I have to remember the parts that are important and be able to phrase it in similar ways so that I don't lose the essence of what is being said. So when I read, if you're ever to look at any book that I've ever read, you'll see that it's got drawings and lines and different colored highlighters and notes on the margins. It's got all these little bits, and I do little diagrams inside because I want to translate that whole page into one little drawing. Not only is that how I remember things, but that's how I could teach it. And so that's where I extract, I squeeze every last drop of knowledge from that. So that's me reading with intention. And when we say teach what you know, that's fantastic. So teach what you know. What do you know? Well, that's a good question, because when you ask that question of yourself, how do I know what I know? What decisions am I making based on that knowledge? Now, I was very fortunate enough to be at Art Center while they hired on Dr. Holtzman, who is a faculty advisor. His main job is to teach the teachers how to teach. He's got a PhD, and his specialization is in pedagogy. So he asked me to do this one thing. He says, Chris, when you look at work and when you're critiquing, what are the 5 decisions or the things that you're looking for in order to critique it? He forced me to think about what it is that I know. And by doing that, and by breaking it into bite-sized pieces, I was able to more effectively teach what it is that I know. There's a difference between critiquing someone's work so they know what you want them to do versus telling them, these are the decisions I'm making and this is what I'm looking for. Having that kind of clarity is fantastic. But teaching what you know is really intimidating for a lot of people. Because what do I know? You have imposter syndrome. Have I done enough? Have I read enough? Have I accomplished enough? And chances are that's enough to stop most people. Well, I've modified that phrase to teach while you learn. Whew. Well, that takes off all the stress, all the burden of saying, I know something. Well, I don't know anything, but I'm learning this thing. And tomorrow I could learn something else that would negate what I learned before. But if you operate in that mindset, not only will that free you, break your shackles, that you can start teaching immediately, it also means that you will not rob other people of learning while you learn. The novice makes a better teacher than the expert, because the expert has forgotten how hard it is to get there and thinks of what it is that they're teaching to be rather easy. The novice is a better teacher. That's why I say teach while you learn.
So when you're teaching while you're learning, and I love what you said about using those diagrams like for the books that you're reading. I mean, are you literally reading a page, taking notes, making a diagram, and then immediately making a video about it? Or are you like going through an entire body of work, of knowledge, annotating the whole time or learning the whole time, and converting that into your own knowledge? And then once you're finished with that book, then you teach? Like, specifically, how do you go about doing that?
Okay, I'm going to share with you a quote first from Jim Rohn from his book, 7 Strategies of Wealth and Happiness. He said that wealth is your ability to convert your knowledge and experience into equity and capital. You have to transform. You have to take what's here and you have to make something. You have to share it with somebody. So if I learn a new concept about design and I share it with you, Ben, well, I've made a small conversion because it's just one person. And you might find that to be very valuable, in which you could say, well, Chris, I know you charge $1,000 an hour to coach people. Thank you for that hour. I'll wire you a check for $1,000. That's fantastic. But when I get on the internet and I produce a video teaching that same lesson, but 100,000 people see it, now they're not going to give me $1,000 each. That would be wonderful because I would be very wealthy at this point, right? But I've created value for them. And at some point, because of the law of reciprocity, if you read Dr. Cialdini's book on influence, the power of persuasion, or the psychology of persuasion, he says we govern our society, our culture as human beings by the law of reciprocity. What that means is when you receive something, you feel compelled to return it. And it's not a one-to-one ratio. And there's many tests and experiments done to prove this theory. So as I give to people, and they feel like their life is enriched by it, that they've learned something, that they're inspired, or something clicks for them all of a sudden. When I go out and make a new course or announce a book or a t-shirt or something, they now have the opportunity to give that money back. So because they want to even the scales, because nobody wants to see themselves as a leech. as a taker, right? As a bloodsucker, as a parasite. So that's why. So I'm converting at a much higher scale than I ever have. So when I'm reading that book, I'm highlighter in hand, pen in hand, writing, making notes, reading. Now, if it's a dumb book, I just throw it away and I move on to the next book. But luckily, I have very good books. Okay, so I'm writing and taking notes. If there's an opportunity, I'm going to transform that immediately. So the next day, if I'm having a conversation with somebody or I'm doing a keynote and somebody asks a question, oh, I just remember this thing. I read it. I remember it and I can teach it to you right now. And I cite the reference and I say it to them and they're, wow, how does this guy know all these things? Well, because I read the book. I'm hungry for more information. Sometimes if it's a fairly short book and I feel like it's really dense with good information, I would then go onto my computer, open up Keynote, reread the parts that I've highlighted, the notes I've taken to do a book summary. Sometimes I make videos on that. Sometimes I do presentations on that. Here's the 10 things I learned from this book. Top 10. Here you go. And I could do that too. So I'm not necessarily thinking I'm going to do this and transform it over here. It's not always that 1-to-1 ratio, but it's happening. That conversion is happening much faster than most people think.
So for somebody that's listening, watching, and they're thinking, oh my goodness, like I have to do this and I have to do this now, what would be the process to go through in order to understand what vehicle they should use to teach? Because you could write a book, you could write blog posts, you could start a podcast, you could do videos, you could, I don't even know all the ways that you could teach,
Right.
but there are a billion ways. Like, how do you figure out what the most effective expression of that knowledge is?
Do what's natural for you. Literally just do what's natural for you. So my background is in motion graphics. So I understand how to tell stories using video in a linear sequence. I know the technical parts. I have the tools. I have the team. So that's where I'm going to go. I'm going to make videos for YouTube consumption. I'm going to teach using this medium. If you like to write, well, write something. If you like to design, make information graphics. If you like to write poetry or do spoken word, do that. If you're a performance artist, do that. Whatever your jam is, go do that and start there. Because the problem is if you say, well, he wants me to make a YouTube video, I don't have equipment. All those things become barriers to doing what it is that you should be doing, which is to go teach. And that's what matters, right? So short form, long form content, whatever your jam is, go make it. If you do sculptures, make a sculpture of what you learned so that it makes sense for people. If you're a game designer, if you're in ludology, go invent a game that teaches people. For example, you know the kerning game that people play on the internet? So it's just a little, I think, some kind of interactive tool where you can typeset things and you can move things around. So you get a score based on how well you kern. And it teaches you the art of kerning while playing a game. That's pretty cool.
That is cool. So what about for people, like, for example, I love to write and I love to do videos and speak. So it's like, I don't actually know which one I like more because they're both amazingly fun and very rewarding. And I feel like I can communicate pretty well through both.
Yeah.
What do you do then?
Well, I would write my talk. I would speak in front of the camera and I would record that. Basically, you're putting all the skill sets together into one, which makes you better if you're then you trying to compete against other writers who are better writers than you. It makes you better than the videographers who know to shoot better than you. And it makes you better than the speakers who are really good at that, but can't produce a video so nobody will find out about them. So I lean into all of who I am. So I don't ask you at this point in time to choose, but to try to combine. There's a difference there. So I'm standing in front of you. Why? Because I like to learn. I like to read. I like to teach. I like to share. I like to make videos. And this is very rewarding for me. I've learned a lot about design, about business. I've been coached. And I talk about my family, my personal life, the story of an immigrant. I put as much of that together as possible to share it with you. That cannot be copied because you would literally have to be me. So there can be a Black version, a Latino version, a Filipino version, a white version, but they still can't be me.
And this is why you're the expert. That's awesome, man. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. That's very helpful.
Mhm. Okay.
Got one more question for you.
Well, let me ask
Uh,
you this question first.
yeah.
Where are you from?
New Orleans.
New Orleans. Okay. And what's your ethnic makeup?
So I'm Jewish, and
Okay.
I, I guess I'm also white. I think I'm
Kind
not
of white.
sure.
You're not
Uh,
sure?
I'm 52% like European, Eastern European Jewish, like Ukraine, Russian area, and then
Hmm.
another part is like English, Welsh.
Okay. So there's a lot of different parts that you can lean into. Here's what I've learned by watching other people who are great personalities and who are very entertaining. One person in particular has a show called Patriot Act. His name is Hassan Minhaj. I've noticed that Hassan Minhaj has done something that's really powerful and really owning who he is in a way that I think gives a lot of people who don't look like everybody else an opportunity. So he is Indian, Muslim, he's tall and skinny, he's got very dark eyebrows and thick, thick hair. And he comes on stage and he has this graphic behind him. He says, if anybody knows anything about me, there's a silhouette of his head and it's broken into a pie chart, right? He says, I'm pretty much like 65% hip hop and 17% is hair product. And then 3% is sneakers or something, whatever he says. And it's pretty funny. He has very clearly understood who he is and who he represents himself to be to other people. He then will often say things like uncle, and he slips in a little bit of Hindi when he talks. And he talks about UC Davis, because that's where he went to school, and how they hate UC Santa Cruz, the slugs. He's always dissing on them the whole time, calling them not a real school. So people who are in the UC system understand that. So he's owning all of who he is. So you're Eastern European, Jewish heritage, living in New Orleans, whatever it is that you do, bring that out. Allow that person to play and dance with it, because otherwise you're just going to be another white guy on the camera, right? Lean into who you are. So your culture, your food, your language, your history, bring that together. The challenging part is bringing it in a way that feels cohesive and not disjointed.
How do you do that? How do you bring it together cohesively?
That's what designers do. What designers do is they take things that don't belong together, disparate things, and they find that common thread, right? This is the beauty of a designer who can stare at a cat and get lost in the cat's eye and think of a galaxy far away, right? And then to think of an oil spill on the road because of the blackness, and pans up to find the car, and goes on and on and on. We can find that connection between things that don't belong. If it were easy, everybody would do it. Everybody funny. Everybody would be themselves. But this is not the task for everybody. It's a task for some. And this is what I'm starting to lean into. Just recently, I come back from Creative South. I step on the stage. I think there are 3 Asian people out of 800 here. There are about maybe 40 black people, and the rest are white people. So I know what I'm stepping into here, right? It's the South. It's in Columbus, Georgia. I step on stage, I walk over, I say my little bit. I said, just in case you haven't noticed, I am Asian. And people laugh, right? And I say, there are some stereotypes about Asians that are true. Yes, we are good at math. There's a slide for math, and I do the math. They laugh again. So you see, like, I lean into who I am. I want to make it relevant. So bringing up random points, not very creative. Anybody can do that. Bringing up a random point and tying it into the main part of who you are and your talk or your big idea, that is the skill. So there's a couple of million, maybe a billion Indians in the world. I can't name very many of them, but I can name Hassan Minhaj because he's figured out how to bring it together. So if you watch his comedy special, I think it's called Homecoming, watch how he does it. One of the most brilliant, tightly scripted comedic acts that involves audio visuals that it was just like, wow. He was saying when he discovered he has a sister, like, who brought this brown person into this house? You know, so he's very hyper aware, and he's speaking from a very emotionally true and vulnerable space that makes him really powerful. And nobody can rip that part off because you didn't go to UC Davis. You're not Indian. You're not Muslim. You don't have great hair. You're not tall, whatever it is, that's what he owns. So I'm learning a lot from that. I'm watching that. And you see a lot of comedians doing this. They lean into who they are, probably better than most.
That is very, very powerful. That is extremely powerful. I would actually highly encourage everybody who's watching and listening to go back and listen to that bit in particular. Of course, the whole interview, but that bit in particular, I mean, that really resonated with me. So, definitely want to make sure that we don't lose all those layers of gems that, in the value bombs that you're just dropping. So I have one more question for you.
Okay, go ahead.
Unless you have any more, concepts or ideas that you want to throw in there, because the past 2 times have been home runs for sure. So I don't want to get in the way of that. But I'm 24, right? I have a couple businesses, but this show is my greatest passion. What question should I be asking you, like specifically me, asking specifically you with your wisdom, your knowledge, your experience, your genius, that I just wouldn't think to ask?
Yeah, that's the old what question didn't I ask question. And sometimes there is an easy answer, sometimes there isn't. I'm not sure that there's any question that I can think of. Here's one thing that I'll give advice to you as I'm learning how to do podcasts myself, right? I want to be a great conversationalist. So the research and the question preparation helps, but sometimes it hurts in that you're thinking about the questions you have yet to ask, but to be in the conversation so that you and I were like sitting in a car driving for 6 hours somewhere, there's no questions. We would just talk. And when you hear something interesting, you just go into that and you keep going into it until you feel like, wow, I didn't know where we started. I don't know where we went, but where we got to was freaking amazing. I read something about George R.R. Martin and the way he writes. He creates a fictional world, Game of Thrones. He creates these characters, and he writes it in such a way that he feels like the characters write it themselves, and that he doesn't always quite know where it's going to go. So it's not clear. It's not very like plot driven where Jamie Lannister's going to do this, then he'll do that, then he'll do this. And sometimes in the moment, he'll say things and he'll change his mind. And that's kind of, I think, part of the lure of the characters he's created is they're just like us. They make bad decisions. They make good decisions. And it's sometimes weird. And that's pretty awesome. And a conversation should be like that. I just got off doing a live stream this morning with Stefan Bucher, and he brought the conversation in weird places, and I just danced with him the whole time. And I have no idea where we're going, and I have to just realize I'm going to surrender myself to the conversation, let go of any scripts. I had questions to ask, but I didn't even look at them once because it was so interesting. So I think we prepare because we're not quite sure. Sometimes our guests, they don't know how to talk. But your job is to just keep digging and digging until you find something that you think is some kind of larger universal message that we can connect with in our human experience to exist and to find purpose. That's it.
I want to thank you so much for coming on the show today and for sharing everything that you have. Again, it truly was a pleasure and an honor, and I want to thank you once again. I mean, I really can't thank you enough. So, yeah, you're awesome.
Thanks, Ben. You're off to a very good start. You are a good conversationalist. The fact that you said you're 26 years old and you're doing this, you're well on your way. I'm not even doing podcasts until like I'm 40 something years old. All right. So you are so far ahead of the game. You don't even know it. So keep doing this, keep teaching, keep teaching while you're learning, and the world will be yours, whatever you want from it.
Thank you very much. And to everybody who's listening, I want to thank y'all. Y'all are the reason that I do this, and y'all the best. I really do love you guys, and I really can't thank y'all enough for sticking with us to the end, being a part of this experience, and just being total badasses in your own way. So thank y'all very much. You want to wrap us up?
That's all the wrap I got, I think. If you guys want to find out a little bit more about us, I'm at the Chris Do. That's spelled D-O, Do. And you can find us on YouTube at The Future Is Here. We're everywhere else.
Right. L'chaim, to life. Let's
There
change
you
the
go.
world.
Nicely done.